Hi, today I will be giving you my full review of the Asics GlideRide. A few months ago I gave my early impressions of these runners. Now I have put about 170 kilometers or 100 miles and my views on these shoes have changed. The GlideRides are a heavily cushioned, high stack, neutral running shoe. My size is US 11.5 and they're 330 grams or 11.6 ounces, which for my runners is definitely on the heavy side. Initially, I really struggled in these and I documented that in my early impressions video. But at the time I was in base training, I was doing all easy miles, and for me, my running form tends to get sloppy in those circumstances. You zone out on those runs, you're not really thinking about technique, and bad habits form. It wasn't until I started doing the speed work that my technique started sharpening up. And what I noticed in actually one of the videos is that my stride, my foot strike, was starting to move out, sort of duck feet, if you like. And when I was able to straighten them up, so a bit more strength through the hip and hip flexors, these runners felt a lot better. So they work really well if you're striding properly and you're on hard surfaces. They're unforgiving if your technique drops away, and they also don't feel that great on the trails. But I actually felt it helped me. So when I do my long runs, it helps me concentrate on just holding that technique a bit. And when they start to feel not so good, I can actually, it's like a signal that my technique is probably falling away and time just to pull it back in. The outsole of the GlideRide has this channel in there. I'm not really sure what the purpose of that is. I have caught a stone in there twice. Hasn't been an issue. Second time, I didn't even notice until I got home. Good points about the GlideRide. The obvious first point is the amount of cushioning. You've got quite a high stack. It's not as soft as something like a Hoka, but it has great shock absorption. I can do long miles on the hard surfaces with these runners and I don't pump sore. Second point would be the meta rocker. Again, like the Hokas, it has that spring off with that meta rocker where the toe is quite high. In fact, I would say this has a bigger meta rocker than the Hokas. And durability, they've done 170 kilometers and they still look like new. I think you would easily get 800 kilometers or 500 miles out of these shoes. I suspect you could get a lot more, but as a rule, I retire my shoes when they get to that distance, regardless of what they look like. The shape of the shoe is also really good for my foot. It does get a wide forefoot is what I like, and it's reasonably snug around the ankle and the midfoot. So for me, I get a really good feel in this shoe. I don't get any issues with my toes bumping into the front here, and it's going to be really comfortable for that long run. Things I don't like about the shoe. To start off, the weight. It is very heavy. At 330 grams or 11.6 ounces, it's the heaviest shoe I own. I know Asics tend to make heavier shoes, and this is actually probably one of the lighter ones in their range, but I like a light shoe. The other thing I don't like about it is the upper. It's actually very plush. That gives you a lot of comfort, but I find my feet sweat. I don't usually suffer from hot feet, but every run I've done in these shoes, I have come back and my feet have been warm. And with the upper being so plush, I wear really thin socks, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. So at the moment, we're in the middle of winter. I can't imagine how hot I'm going to get in these runners come summer. Another problem with these shoes is they don't feel great on the trails, even a hard groomed trail. It just doesn't feel that great. It feels great on the hard road. Every other pair of runners I own feel fine on the trails. These seem to be the exception. One more small issue I have with the GlideRides is the stiffness of the upper. So at the end of my long runs, my feet stop being as relaxed as they would normally. They just sort of stress a little bit, and sometimes they can rub against the top here. On my other runners, the upper is a little bit softer, a little bit stretchier, a little bit kinder to the top of my toes. Whereas I have noticed on a couple of my longer runs that I've just pulled up just a little bit sore on the top of those toes, and I think it's just less forgiving nature, less stretchy, less soft upper on the GlideRides. Now, how do I use these runners? I bought them specifically for the long run. That seems to be what other reviewers were saying they liked them for. I've also been using them for a lot of aerobic runs, especially in the pandemic where the trails are just overcrowded with people doing their 60-minute exercises. Like that. I've been running on the middle of the road in the back streets, and these are great for that. They sit there very comfortable on the harder surface, great impact absorption, and I can get in my 60 minutes of aerobic running really nicely in these shoes. I actually did a threshold interval session with these shoes, and they were pretty good. I was surprised about how well they did. However, when I compare them to my other shoes that I run in, like the New Balance Rebels or the Hoka Rincons, the pace was just a touch lower and the heart rate was higher. And what I noticed as well, in the later intervals, I did start to notice the weight. For comparison against other shoes in my rotation, it would have to be the Clifton. This is the other shoe that I bought specifically for long runs. It's got similar cushioning, although these are a bit softer. The Clifton doesn't have the wide toe box, so it doesn't fit the shape of my foot as well, so it's not as comfortable in that aspect, although it does have a much softer and thinner upper. The shoe in general is a fair bit lighter, and it feels great on trails. So if the long run was going to be at least 80% on the road, I would choose the GlideRides. It just has a bit more energy return. You just get a little bit more free speed. It feels really good on the hard surfaces. But once you have a run which is going to have a little bit more trails, I would go to the Cliftons. It's just that little bit more versatile. It feels better on the road, but it still feels pretty good on the trails. As far as racing goes, maybe an Ironman run where you're not really running that fast, but I couldn't see myself racing in these. They're just too heavy. As I mentioned earlier in the threshold intervals, as the intervals went on, I started to feel the weight. They're really well balanced, and at the start you don't, but over time the weight is just something they just can't hide. Will I buy it again? If we're still in the pandemic, definitely. It's really been my go-to shoe. If in some time in the future that the social isolation eases off and the trails become a bit more deserted like they used to be, I'm not sure if I'd get as much running in these. I like to do all my running on trails. Even my long runs, I like to be on those groomed trails. I find it more interesting scenery. It just makes the run go easier. And these runners just didn't really suit that. I hope the video has been helpful, especially if you're trying to decide whether or not to buy the GlideRide. If you enjoyed it, please hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel.